Can Frank Wilson and the LSU Tigers keep everything together before the Tigers name their next head coach? That is next here on this crossover.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Into this crossover edition of Locked On the Portal and Locked On LSU. Thank you for being a part of the show today. And if you have not yet become an everydayer, I am Brian Smith, long-time college football recruiting analyst. I will be joined momentarily by Matt Moscona, voice basically of everything LSU and what's going on. We're going to get to that. But today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. You won't find an easier place to get tickets. I can assure you of that personally. Again, this is going to be about LSU's coaching search in addition to how do they manage the roster? How are they going to find the next coach in a timely fashion with the end of the season being the 29th of November and National Signing Day being December 3rd? There's a lot of stuff to get into. But first off, let's bring Matt onto the show. And thank you, sir, for coming on.
Hey, Brian.
Appreciate it. Obviously, it is a very busy time for anybody associated with LSU in any sporting capacity because LSU is the flagship program in the state and it's a unique school. I have history with it. You cover it in every fashion. Baseball, actually, I like your baseball podcast even better. LSU baseball is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
but man,
it's way fun when they're winning championships, man.
Hell yes. Right off the bat, Frank Wilson is as good a recruiter, in my opinion. I've covered recruiting most of my life in some capacity, as there is in the country. But how does one in today's world with the NIL, worrying about your roster in addition to recruits, how does Frank keep this ship in the right path? How do you do that?
Yeah. He actually, when Frank met with reporters last week on Tuesday for the first time since being named interim, that was one of the questions he was asked. So first of all, there have been no opt-outs, which is interesting because you would assume you got some guys with eyes toward the NFL and maybe guys who realize that if they were here to win and then your championship goals are off the table. So that's first and foremost, I think, important. Something Frank's very good at. These guys on the team love Frank. A lot of them committed to play for Frank as the recruiting coordinator, and I shouldn't say play for Frank, but with him as the recruiting coordinator. So he was the right choice to sort of galvanize the roster. But the other thing that was interesting about the signing class, there's two things really. Number one, because Frank is a recruiting coordinator and has a lot of those relationships maintained, he and by extension Austin Thomas, the general manager, I think a lot of the pillars that were in place that got a lot of these guys to commit to begin with are still there. Number one. Number two, you can't forget, Louisiana is a state that allows high school NIL. I know most do, but effectively the way that the collective has worked throughout college football the past few years, which is effectively pay for play, you can't do that anymore with your roster in college football, but you can pay the high school players through the collective. So a lot of these guys that are committed, especially the blue chip guys, they already have NIL deals through LSU's collective. So they're already getting paid by the collective. And the way, as I've been told, that those contracts are structured was that if they decommit, they would have to repay the money that's already been paid them. Now, certainly you could have a situation where the school they flip to strokes that check. If it's a good enough prospect, then it would be worth doing. But that's something to consider that, Brian, like in this era, unlike past eras, a lot of these commitments they are financially bound to the school they're committed to already. So there's another variable there that might keep them committed. So there's a lot of reasons why you haven't seen turnover. So no opt-outs and no decommits since Brian Kelly's firing.
I was surprised that like everybody, they've got a kid from LA that's a DB, et cetera, that are out of state. The in-state kids, as soon as he got fired, I'm like, I've lived in Louisiana. Most of these kids wanted to go to LSU anyway. They might lose one. But it's the out-of-state kids that are iffy. Have you heard any rumblings on that, or what's the deal there?
So who you're talking about is Haven Finney. Haven Finney was the number one cornerback in the country for 2027. and he reclassed to
Right.
26. So I don't know what his ranking is, but he's a legit. I mean, he's the dude with the long arms. It looks like a pterodactyl on the outside.
Absolutely.
He's an incredible player. And I had a chance to talk to his dad, Haven Finney Sr., whenever he committed, and like there is no ambiguity. He is committed to Corey Raymond, the LSU defensive backs coach. So and even this week, I know Haven Finney Jr. made some comments that forgive me, I can't remember which of the recruiting service. I'll always like to give attribution. I just can't remember offhand. Made some comments that like as long as Corey's there, still good. So I think the thing to watch there specifically is whoever the new coach is, does that coach retain Corey Raymond? And an interesting sort of subplot there, Brian, is when Brian Kelly got hired, he did not retain Corey Raymond. And remember, this is the guy that for a decade was the guy who kind of built the DBU mantra, right? Like he's the guy who he came after Patrick Peterson, but all throughout that era in the 2010s, that was all Corey Raymond. And he went to Florida, and LSU's defensive backfield just completely disintegrated. It hit an all-time low in 2023, the year that Jaden won the Heisman, when they had the number one total in scoring offense in the country, and it was statistically the worst defense in LSU's history. And then Brian Kelly rehired Corey Raymond from Florida. So admitting an error on the front end. So all that to say, whoever is the coach, whether Frank Wilson gets the job on a full-time basis or they go hire Lane Kiffin, whatever, we'll talk about it, but whatever it ends up being, it would make a lot of sense. It would greatly behoove whoever gets that job full-time.
I agree. I've been around Corey. He's as nice a guy as you're going to meet. I was at a game a couple years ago when we were talking about DJ Pickett on the sidelines, at a high school game in Daytona, Florida. So he's pretty chill, easy to get to know. So I'm not surprised because I've known DJ since he was in 8th grade. He was a guy. Legit.
Oh man.
Yeah. I told people when he was in 8th grade, I would have taken him then. They laughed at me. I said, okay, go on. He's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He's that long. But
you're talking about a dude that's like sometimes you see guys. I mean, he's a legit 6'4" plus. Like that you can look at him standing next, like flat foot next to guys with real size. That's not an embellished size on the roster, which happens. Like Diego Pavia being 6 foot, right?
5'10.5", 5'11".
Right. He's a legit 6'4". And the amazing thing, like as you know, is his ability to turn and run. He can flip his hips and run. So you don't typically see guys with that size that can run like that. He's incredible. I mean, there's a reason he was the number one corner in the country. And, he effectively pushed out a guy like Ashton Stamps, who a year ago led the SEC in pass breakups and just announced he's not playing this year and he's going to enter the transfer portal. I mean, he's a veteran player who left because Pickett basically took all his reps.
That's why Corey is so important, because Oregon, Florida, Miami, every school in the country recruited him, and he decided, and I tell this to people all the time, kids pick coaches, not schools. I know in the state of Louisiana that especially probably doesn't go well, but it's just true. I'm in the 7-on-7 world. I'm getting ready to start working with Coastline, who will probably take kids to LSU this year. They pick coaches, and DJ's another one. It's like Finney. That's why he's at LSU. 100%.
Yeah. And if you want to, so where you sort of started, if you want to retain the roster, that'll be a big part of it as well. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily across the board true. And it's naive to think that LSU isn't going to have any attrition. Of course, you're going to have attrition. I mean, you're going to have a coaching change, and there's going to be playing time, and there's going to be portal and guys wanting to get paid. But it has been impressive as of now, their ability to retain this roster. And depending on who that coaching hire is and who they retain, I think will go a long way to determine who's able to stay for who they retain for 2026.
I agree. I totally agree. And to that, next, we're going to talk about who are the best candidates, in Matt's opinion, to be the next LSU head coach. That is next here on this crossover, Locked On the Portal and Locked On LSU. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. College football is rocking. We are going through another crazy season. Just look at LSU as an example. All the tailgates, rivalries, and everything that's going on in the stands. There's not quite like a college football game and being at it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more than a battle. And that's not much fun because it's endless queues, hidden fees, and the prices jumping out at you at the checkout. That's why I use Game Time, and I literally just bought tickets this last week on Game Time, in and out in 5 minutes. And that includes me putting in my credit card information. All you got to do is download the app, find the game you're looking for, click on it. You can even see your seat view. It is easy. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download the Game Time app today. All right, Matt. Thank you once again for coming on doing this crossover. This is fun. Probably not much fun for you in some ways because I'm sure your phone is probably Grand Central Station right now. But I'm just going to throw out some names. You tell me whether you think, as somebody's a lifelong LSU guy and covering them, not only is it a fit, do you think the LSU fan base, which can be rather particular, will accept that hire at least initially? Of course, if you start winning, everything changes. But number one, Lane Kiffin. Like, everybody's got an opinion on him, and I know he's winning. Do you think the LSU fan base would get behind him from day one, yay or nay?
Yeah, I think he's at the top of everyone's wish list, right? Now, I don't know if it's realistic, Brian, but Lane is the guy that I think everyone, as they start the conversation, sort of covets for a lot of reasons. I mean, look, he's also beaten LSU 2 of the last 3 years.
Sure.
They won this year in Oxford. And I think everyone sees a more mature Lane Kiffin. The interesting thing, too, is, listen, 4 years ago when LSU was hiring a coach, LSU and Florida were both open, just like they are now. And neither LSU or Florida gave Lane Kiffin an interview. And I know that did not sit well with Lane Kiffin. He also now is at a very different point, I think, in his career and his life. It's pretty obvious than he was 4 years ago. So I don't know that Lane Kiffin is, number one, eager to leave Ole Miss, because I think this season is proving he has the resources to get to the playoff and possibly win in Oxford. I think the other gigantic question about Kiffin is, when you look at the contract, it is going to take a 9-figure, $100 million guaranteed contract to get Lane Kiffin away from Ole Miss. And we just spent this whole week with this big dust up with the governor of Louisiana, making it abundantly clear that he's not interested in having contracts structured like that for LSU coaches anymore. So if you're not going to give him the contract, like, why would Lane Kiffin leave Ole Miss for an incentive-based contract? I don't think he would. So I don't know. LSU's basically got to make a decision if they're willing to pay that number. And if they are, and let's say Ole Miss bows out of the playoff early, provided they make it, which I assume they will, then maybe you have that conversation. But Brian, paint the picture where Ole Miss gets in the playoff, they win their opening round game. Let's say they play on New Year's Day and they win their quarterfinal game. Well, now you've missed the December signing period, and you're bleeding into the January portal period, and there's only one portal window now. So you've punted your roster for 2026. And what commits are going to stay true to LSU, and what portal guys can you really attract when you don't know who the coach is going to be? Now, maybe you can have some informal conversations with those guys off the record about you're talking to Lane Kiffin, but there could always be the situation where Ole Miss keeps winning, and then is Lane actually going to leave? So I just think there's a lot of complicating variables that make that unlikely. Is it possible? Sure. I'm not so sure I believe it's likely.
That's exactly where I am. And I've told people this, and right before Matt and I recorded this, Auburn fired Hugh Freeze. And we knew that was coming after scoring 3 points at home against Kentucky. Will do that to you.
Kentucky is awful. Like
they're bad.
That is, well, I guess Auburn's awful too, which I thought for sure Hugh Freeze would work there, man. I mean,
I thought he would too.
That's one of the biggest surprises, I think, of in the SEC this year. I could see, we all could see it happen with Billy Napier and Sam Pittman. Brian Kelly was stunning because of the timing and the money. Freeze not working out at Auburn I would have never seen
He had
that.
a losing record, not even close in the
Yeah.
SEC. It's just mind blowing, but it is what it is. Lane is one SEC coach, but this is the one I don't know how to put a bow around. Eli Drinkwitz. What are your thoughts? I have no opinion. Do you like that idea? Yay, nay? What are your thoughts?
So one thing to keep in mind, let me play a little connect the dots for you. So Verge Osbury is LSU's interim athletic director. Verge played at LSU. He's been an LSU athletics administrator for 30 years, almost his whole professional life. His son Jaden was a really good 4-star safety who plays at Notre Dame right now for Marcus Freeman. So there's a personal relationship with Marcus Freeman to where I think I don't know if Freeman would leave Notre Dame. Wouldn't that be something if LSU hired another Notre Dame coach? But I don't think Freeman would leave Notre Dame for LSU, but I do think he would take the call as a courtesy. But one thing that's interesting with the connect the dots is Freeman's agent is the same agent for Eli Drinkwitz, for Mike Elko, for John Summerall. So sometimes the way those conversations happen, just kind of a little inside baseball for the audience, the athletic administrator would call, and you don't have conversations with the coaches, you have conversations with the coach's representative. So you call the agent, and the agent will want to know, okay, what are you looking to spend? And might say, well, okay, well, Freeman's not interested, but what about da 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 da? And you go down the list. And on that list would be Drinkwitz, Summerall, like some of those names that would maybe more make sense. Now, I think we're all kind of in our brains, we look at Drinkwitz, and let's just be honest. I mean, the guy's name's Eli Drinkwitz. He's kind of a nerdy looking guy. He's not very imposing or intimidating. And I get all that, why people kind of crack on him a little bit. But he's won at Missouri. Now, he's won because they've manipulated their schedule, kind of in a similar way Indiana did a year ago, where they play nobody in their pre-conference, so they artificially inflate their number to 8, 9 wins, win a bowl game, and then they're at 9 or 10, which is great for Missouri, but that's not going to fly here necessarily. I think Drinkwitz would absolutely leave Missouri for LSU. It's undeniably a better football job. I don't know that if it would make sense for LSU if you're saying, okay, would you spend more for Eli Drinkwitz or less, a little bit less, and get John Summerall? I would argue Summerall would be the better candidate. I think Drinkwitz is an interesting candidate. I think he could do well here. I just don't know that that's the guy that sort of leads the charge or is at the top of anybody's list as of right now.
Well, you already said it, so that's next. Summerall. I personally think he's a good coach. I live in Auburn, Alabama, because it's a nice location for recruiting. I go recruit stuff all over the place. And his name came up even last year. If Freeze fails this next season, Summerall might be a guy, because he was at Troy before he went down to Tulane. I'm sure you've crossed paths with him in some capacity, but there's different variations of what the LSU fan base historically will accept. And one of the directional schools or Tulane is not one of them. Tell me I'm wrong, because I have a feeling there would be some resistance. What do you think?
Well, 4 years ago, we saw with Billy Napier. Napier was the hottest name among the G5. And we can all look with the benefit of hindsight now and see it didn't work at Florida, but Napier was the name everybody wanted. Remember, he had passed on other SEC jobs. He had passed on Mississippi State. I believe he passed on Tennessee, maybe passed on Auburn. I mean, he had some, or South Carolina, maybe. So Napier was the guy, but here the word was, you can't hire the coach from UL Lafayette. And again, I think that's short-sighted. I think it's downright stupid. But I do think there would be people who said the same thing about Summerall. Now, I would love it if LSU hired John Summerall. It's a very different situation than Napier. Now, Napier Napier had been on staff at Alabama under Nick Saban. He had a lot of those ties. Summerall is from Texas. He played in the SEC at Kentucky. He's coached at Kentucky. He's coached at Ole Miss. He had a second stint at Kentucky. He's coached on the West Coast. He's been a two-time head coach, as you mentioned, at Troy and now at Tulane. He knows the state of Louisiana. He's 43 years old. He's a young guy with tons of energy who's a great football coach. And I think, Brian, the most important part of making this hire is not necessarily someone who's been a proven head coach. It's someone who's proven they can win or are willing to work within the current climate of college football, portal, NIL, all that. See, this thing with Brian Kelly that we forget. When Kelly was hired, there's no coach active in college football that had more wins than Brian Kelly. He'd never been fired. He's won everywhere he's been. But Brian Kelly got hired in late 2021. I mean, NIL was 6 months old. So during his time at LSU is when we saw the evolution of NIL to true pay for play, what it became. And his whole methodology of recruiting and developing players and just supplementing in the transfer portal got flipped on its head. And he just didn't adapt in the same way Dabo didn't adapt and Mike Gundy didn't adapt. And, Nick Saban didn't want to adapt, so he just retired. I think Summerall is a guy at 43 that is like wrapped his arms around it fully and would do a phenomenal job. So I don't know that I would tell you John Summerall would be at the top of my list. Like my number one would be Dan Lanning, but I don't think that's realistic. Again, he's already said point blank, he's not leaving Oregon. And I believe him for whatever it's worth. But when we start talking about the list of realistic candidates, and you talk about a guy that would take the type of contract structure that might be, an increase based on what he's making now, but an incentive-laden deal with bonus structure and all, I think Summerall would be. I think that'd be a phenomenal hire, and I think as you just mentioned there, Brian, as well, you'd have competition if Auburn is in the mix as well, which might force LSU's hand a bit.
That is why it's so interesting, because think about just the Southeastern Conference. Florida, Auburn, and LSU are open. When Auburn is the third option, that's a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But it's not LSU or Florida. It's wild. I have no idea who Auburn's going to hire if they don't stay within and go that route. But whatever, Summerall's been on the list. You mentioned, because I was going to ask anyway, Dan Lanning. The money at Oregon is unfathomable because they have the greatest booster of all time, Phil Knight. Can anybody ever hire Lanning away? Is it as long as Phil's alive? It's a good gig, but he's a Southern. He coached at Bama and Georgia. I figured LSU would be eventually the spot he would end up at. But if he said, I didn't know he said that. What have you heard on Lanning?
Dan Lanning said point blank in a press conference last week. He said, "I'm not leaving Oregon. So the only way I'm leaving, as long as I win, I'm staying." Meaning like that if they have to fire him. So when it was akin to Nick Saban's, "I'm not going to be the Alabama coach." It was that strong of a denial, not one of these weaving non-denial denials. He point blank said, "I'm not leaving Oregon." So when he was asked specifically about LSU, so I believe him. So that would be the only. It wouldn't be money. It would be just a desire to get back to the South and coach in the SEC, if that's ultimately whatever got him away from Oregon. If I'm LSU, I'm taking my swing, but I don't think that I don't think Lanning's leaving Oregon. I think if you get past that top tier, you're looking at the combination, some version of what you just mentioned with Drinkwitz. We talked about John Summerall. Dan Mullen, I think, would be interesting. Brilliant offensive mind, brilliant play caller. The knock was he hated recruiting. Well, guess what? You recruit with a checkbook now. So I think that could work. And then the wild cards, I think, are a couple of NFL guys with LSU ties in Kelvin Shepard and Joe Brady. Shepard's currently the defensive coordinator with the Lions. Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator with the Bills, was on the 2019 staff. I think those would be two other interesting names to keep an eye on.
When we come back, those are actually the guys that I want to talk about. So Matt is reading my mind. That is next here on this crossover, Locked on LSU and the Portal. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA season is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride out the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Matt. I know much more about Brady. I've met him once. Great guy. I don't know diddly about Shepard. So let's start with him. I'm just curious. How long ago did he? Because I probably remember if I could get the year. When did he play for the Tigers? How long ago?
His last season was in 2010. So he's a Georgia native. Came to LSU. Was
Oh,
on
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. The
07.
linebacker.
Yep, was on the
I
07
remember him.
championship team as a young player, and then his last year was in 2010. He was on that great defense that had Patrick Peterson in his
Yep.
final year, Tyrann Matthews freshman year, Morris Claiborne. I mean, they were salty in 2010. Really a launch pad to that 2011 season where they were undefeated and then lost in the championship game to Bama.
I remember I went, it's the only game I saw LSU play that year. I saw the LSU at Auburn game. There was a quarterback at Auburn that was pretty good that year. LSU's the only one that contained him at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great game, but it's one of the best college football games I ever saw live. Do you think Shepard would have an interest in dealing with the same stuff, NIL, all that, or do we have any idea? Because that's a big ask for any coach.
Yeah. So Kelvin and I have kept in touch a little bit since his playing days, and I can tell you unequivocally that if he was offered the job, he would take it. Not even a question.
Okay.
He had a press conference earlier this week as well where he was asked about it, and he kind of gave the non-denial denial where he said, I can't comment on something that doesn't exist. Nobody's asked him about the job or offered him the job, but he spent a solid 90 seconds just gushing about LSU. And he's a Tiger through and through. He won a championship here, and he loves LSU, and was on staff for 1 year here. And when there was turnover, wanted to stay, wanted a full-time opportunity, didn't get it, went to the NFL where he joined Detroit as an assistant linebackers coach and has worked his way up and is now the defensive coordinator. So replacing Aaron Glenn, who got the head coaching job with the Jets. And Shep's awesome, man. You want to talk about a leader of men, a guy that, that could relate to players, they'd rally behind. He would have to hire great coordinators. He would have to obviously lean into the structure with the general manager in place as far as roster building. But my guess is if they did hire Shep, he would also, I would think, retain a good bit of this staff. Corey Raymond, I think, would be a guy. I mean, look, Corey was here when Shep was here. Frank Wilson, some of those really key staff components of the LSU staff, I think, would be retained. So there's some things there where it would lessen the transition a little bit and probably be a little more financially sound as well, because if LSU were to buy out their entire assistant staff, that would be 10 to 12 million bucks on top of Brian Kelly. So I think there's a lot of things that point, to Shep being a good candidate. But it is one of those things where you'd be hiring a first-time head coach, and do you want to? I mean, is LSU the place where you want to take off the training wheels for the first time? And that's a big question.
I mean, there aren't very many that do well at a job like LSU, but if you're dialed into the program, you're a grad, it certainly helps.
Yeah,
I would think. And at LSU, I'm not saying that, some people say it recruits itself. That's a little far, but it might be the best job in the country in terms of you're going to get X number of kids every year, pretty much by default. LSU, you could argue, is the best job in the country. So that is
what I always say, Brian, is LSU and Ohio State are the only two programs where they're the only Power 4 program in a talent-rich state. There's places like Arkansas that it's the only Power 4, but there's no talent in Arkansas. No. But you look at Louisiana and Ohio, and I kind of give a little asterisk with Georgia. I mean, Georgia Tech's there, but if we're being real, Georgia and Georgia Tech aren't exactly fishing in the same pond for recruits. But it's a giant advantage that an LSU coach will always have. I mean, you can throw a rock and you're hitting 4 and 5 stars in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette. I mean, you can run through just look at the receivers: Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors. I mean, all these guys, Kayshawn Booty, all these guys were within 60 miles of LSU's campus. I mean, it's insane. It's a crazy place, man, where they breed great football players. It matters a lot here, and most of them want to go to LSU from the moment they're born. So it's a giant advantage.
Last guy, and that is Joe Brady. I met him once on the recruiting trail, ironically, in Georgia. Great guy, very intelligent. But the knock has always been he doesn't want to recruit. He doesn't like it. I'm going to guess the NIL factor does not help. I'm guessing he's never coaching college again, unless he's just like at the end of his career as a coordinator or something. Any chance, or is that just dead in the water?
Well, I think there's a chance that could happen because of this era where you don't have the recruiting game has just changed so much. I don't want to say it's not important, but here's an example I've given often, Brian. So Jakeem Stewart, okay. Jakeem Stewart's kid from New Orleans, went to St. Aug. So Frank Wilson, LSU's interim head coach, St. Aug alum, legendary player. Jakeem Stewart was the number one defensive tackle in the country for the class of 2026. But he wanted to reclass and graduate early. Well, St. Aug doesn't allow that. They don't allow reclass and all. It's a private school that just didn't allow it. So he transfers to Edna Carr in New Orleans. Frank Wilson basically facilitates the whole thing. The transfer, talks to the archdiocese to get him the classes he needs to make sure that he can graduate early. 100 times out of 100 in a former era, that kid's going to LSU. 100 times out of 100. He's at USC right now because USC paid him $2 million and LSU's NIL deal stopped at 1.2. Like, it's just not the same game anymore. So because of that, because the game has changed and so much now lies on the shoulders of the general manager and what you can afford and how you allocate your roster, if the coaches coach and the GM, quote, front office continues to expand and they're the ones actually building the roster with input from the head coach, then I think there is a chance Brady could find his way back to college. However, I think Joe Brady's going to be in the mix to be a head coach in the NFL in the next cycle. So I think it's more likely next year Joe Brady's an NFL head coach than he is the LSU head coach.
I absolutely agree with that, and more power to him. I can't really say that's a bad gig. That's pretty good. He's got a pretty good gig right now with the quarterback he's working with in Buffalo too. That's pretty outstanding. Matt, I appreciate your time. I'm sure we will be back sooner rather than later doing another one of these, but tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
Yep, I'm on all the social media platforms at Matt Moscona, Moscona, Locked on LSU, your favorite podcast app, YouTube, and for those who are in our neck of the woods, the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, they do air a Locked on LSU every single weekday, so you can catch it on your TV listings as well.
Appreciate it, sir. You can find the Portal Podcast on Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else. Thank you very much, folks. We will see you again soon.